All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning. Share to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev. Josh and Becca Friedman for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month. Le'iloi Nishmas Josh's father, Yisrael Yehuda Ben Rav Chaim Rafael Zichron Livracha. To thank Sammy and Malka Esterson for dedicating all the Shiurim and Drushos this month in memory of their parents. Yitzchak Leib Ben haKohen, Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avraham, Hinda Bas Henoch Efraim, and in the continued Zuchos of the Gesund for Mr. Morton Esterson Admei V'Esim Shalom Tovos. The Pepper family, in connection of the yahrzeit of Yosef Pepper, Yosef Dovid Ben Yaakov Zichron Livracha. I thank our Day of Learning sponsors, Paul and Kathy Pollack, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Paul's aunt, Esther Bas Zechariah Zichron Livracha. And we thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Yerachmiel and Sharon Buck, in memory of Mr. Milton Marder Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah, and the family ein nechama. Well, so with that, let us begin. I think today is the last day of our second to last day of our Talmud Torah sponsors for Kislev. Teves Talmud Torah sponsor is still open. It's amazing it hasn't been grabbed up yet. It's shocking, but Teves is still open. So Meretz Hashem, chaparain while you can. All right, so with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Nun Tes 59. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Nun Chesem. There's a lot to do today, and in Meretz Hashem, hopefully, time permitting, we're going to finish the parak, do halacha l'maisa, and get to Mesilas Sharon. All with time to put on your children before davening. That's been incredible. Incredible what's going to happen today. All right, so that, let us begin. So we are picking up in Meretz Hashem. Let's actually pick up Amr Yitzchak, which is 2, 4, 6, 7 lines up from the bottom on 58b in Chesem. So let's remember again, just to orient ourselves. Who started this whole mess? Yishmael of Kfar Dima, right? And he came with a very simple question. So he started us on this beautiful journey. So Yishmael of Kfar Yama, Kfar Dima, ultimately said as follows. He came with an onion, that the bulb was a Shemitah bulb, and ultimately he replanted it during the 8th year. And then the 8th year growth far surpassed the 7th year growth. So what was his shaila? His shaila was, can the additional growth be mevatel, the original Shemitah identity of the bulb? So we have been going back and forth this entire time. And I will say what we left off with yesterday was a case from Shemitah where it sounds like what we call is that the gidulin malin esikaro. We left off in the Shemitah case, halacha l'maisa, growth has the ability to go ahead and be mevatel, the ikar plant. That's what we ended off with yesterday. But the Gemara said, no, you can't bring a ride from Shemitah. Why not? Amr Yitzchak, Shanya Shvius, Shemitah is different. Why is Shemitah different? Hoil v'isura agabe ayidei karka, betelas nami ayidei karka. Since the Isser Shvius comes about through the earth, through land, therefore ultimately again the bittul, the negation of the Isser Shvius, also comes about through the land. And both say, what does that mean on a deeper level? Good. All right. Excellent. Let's say so. Take a quick look. If you look at the Rush, so we'll say the Rush on the left hand column. So if you notice over here, Shanya Shvius, it's in the wide lines, 2, 4, 5, 6 lines in. Shanya Shvius, Hoil B'Yisura Ayidei Karka. So B'Telas and Ami Ayidei Karka. Kilomar, Ba'odom Mechubel Karka, Yotzim Hetelesa. So I will say, there's something very interesting about Shemitah, the Rush wants to say, which is, you can have produce that's in the land, yet interestingly enough, that same produce that was in the land from year 6, on year 7, has the ability to become Aser. Even though what they will say, it was already in the land in year number 6. Now again, there are different kinds of cases in this. The Rush is just explaining in a hypothetical. In a hypothetical, the fundamental identity of the produce changes because of the earth in which it is situated. He goes on, he says, Shiyotzim Mishishas L'Shvius. So I will say, so again, you could have produce that's in the earth in year number 6, yet come year number 7. So again, in year number 6, it was mutter. Now comes year number 7, what occurs? The fundamental identity changes and suddenly it becomes aser. Now the opposite is true also. Then what also happens? Mishvius l'shminis. you could have produce that's in the earth on year number 7, and then yet what? Which is Asr, and then year number 8, it fundamentally changes its identity. So because of this, because interestingly enough, when it comes to this type of Shemitah, so again, year 6 into year 7, year 7 into year 8, the earth fundamentally changes its identity. Therefore, within that produce itself, you have a mixture of heter and iser. So because of that, we could apply the concept of rov. And the concept of rov says, okay, look at what the majority is. If the majority is iser, then ultimately, again, the produce will be aser. If the majority is heter, the produce will be mutter. So I say, but that's a function of the fact that by definition, Shemitah produce has a ta'aroves, has a mixture of iser and heter, but that's because, again, the earth itself infuses that mixture into it. So again, just finish up the Rosh. Aval orla uklaya kereb she efsherlis arev yachad iser veheter me'atzmo b'mechomer below ma'aseh de adam kigon ba'orla yidesha sivka b'skina. But also, if I contrast that with other isurim, for example, arla, Bosaman again remembers means produce of the first 3 years. Klaya kerem, forbidden mixtures. They will say, how do those situations? How can you ever have a mixture of klaya kerem or a mixture of arla? There has to be human intervention in that, right? They will say, remember again, the case of klaya kerem is when you grafted a first-year branch with an older tree. Or arla, same thing, you replanted arla. There has to be human intervention in these cases in order to create a mixture of heter and iser. So finish the Rosh. So lo chashvin lo me'uravin vidami lemevatel iser biyadayim hilchach ein gidulan malan haseker. So I want to make a very interesting distinction. When it comes to Shemitah, where the entire identity is dependent on the earth, so by definition, you have a mixture of heter and iser in 6th-year produce into 7th year, and 7th-year produce into 8th year. The earth itself endows the produce with a mixed identity. So because the earth itself endows the produce with mixed identity, therefore what? We look at what the majority identity is, and that will determine the identity of the produce. Therefore, again, if you have, for example, a 7th-year plant, and that goes into 8th year, and then the 8th year growth surpasses the 7th year growth, you can say that now the plant is mutter. Say a plant is mutter. Contrast that with other cases, I will say, where the way that the mixture of heter and iser happens is through some form of human intervention. In that case, the Gemara wants to suggest, we will not allow new growth, even if it surpasses old growth, to be mevatel the iser in the produce. An interesting distinction. So the Gemara says, one second, Hari Meiser, the Yisrael de Karka, but look in Meiser. Meiser itself, I will say, is an Isser that is created also through Karka. In other words, we will say the Meiser status of something. If you look at the Rush again, Dazorea Sa'a Tvua Mitukenes Chazra Lios Tevel. So I will say, so the example over here is if you went ahead and you took a Sa'a of wheat, which was already tithed, and then you replanted it, ultimately, again, it would become tevel. It would become untithed produce again. How does that happen? That's a result of the earth. So the Gemara says, but yet, again, you can't go ahead and create a bittul situation through the earth. After all, the sanyo, litra meiser tevel shezara bekarko. If you have, we'll say litra is a measurement. If you have a litra of what we call meiser tevel, so we'll say, so again, if you take a look, I want to just point you in one direction. Good. Take a look at the Rosh again. Listra Meiser Tevel, Meiser Rishon. So also, it's only a case of Meiser Rishon. Remember again, Meiser Rishon is the portion that is set aside for the Levi. Shelo Hofrash Mimena Trumas Meiser. And you did not separate out Trumas Meiser, which is the portion that the Levi separates out from the Kohen, from this grain. And then what did you do? You replanted it. Shezara Bekarka. I will say this time you replanted it before Shemitah, Vishpicha, and then ultimately again the grain grew during the Shemitah. V'harihi ke'eser litrin. Now again it's increased to now 10 litrin. Chayeves b'meiser u'b'shvius. It's obligated in meiser and with Shemitah. Va'osa litra mais, but the original litra, the original amount, so ma'asra mimakom achra lefi cheshbon. You go ahead and you tithe it, but you have to tithe it from a different source. You can't tithe it from that very growth itself. So I will say, what does this prove to us? So halacha l'maisa, this proves to us that additional growth doesn't have the ability to go ahead and negate original growth. To which the Gemara answers on top of nun test. Okay, it's not a good raya. Amri meiser digun hu de kagarin la. Read that differently. Amri meiser digun hu de kagarin la. We've actually seen this. Meiser is a little bit different because meiser obligation of also is established when b'shas digun diguncha. What does that mean? Piling, right? You're only actually obligated in meiser to go ahead and tithe produce once it's piled. At that point in time, it's quote unquote a finished product, and that's where the tithing obligation sets in. So the Gemara goes weiter. We'll say top of Nun Tes 59a, last word on the first line. Masib Brahim Barchamo, Sharbai Charez the Kasha, Konam Peros Ha'elu Alai. So I will say, now listen to this case. This is going back to our Mishnah. Person says, Konam Peros Ha'elu Alai. Right? These Peros should be Konam to me. Konam Hein Lefi, or Alpi, they should be Konam onto my mouth. Konam here, Lifi, they should be Konam to my mouth. So what's the halach in all these cases? Also, right? What is the most I saw again? Remember, this is back to our Mishnah. What happens when you say this? Konam peros ha'elu. What have you done? What have you done? Remember again the Ran. What have you done? You've changed the peros into what? Into hektish. Almost into a chaticha di isura. The object itself becomes inherently prohibited, and therefore what? Not only are the fruits themselves prohibited, but even what? Chilufeihen. If you exchange them for something else. And even if you replant them, the new growth will be usher as well. So the Gemara says, listen to this. On the flip side, shani ochal v'shani toim. But again, if you say, konam, that which I taste, konam, that which I eat, that which I taste, then mutter b'chilufeihen u'b'gidulehen. You're permitted to go ahead and eat their exchange or eat their growth, as long as you're talking about b'davar shezaro kala. As long as we're talking about an item, produce, that the original growth decomposes. Aval b'davar shein zarakala. But I will say, if you have a growth, but if it was something where the original growth does not decompose, afilu gidulin asurin. Even I will say the growths of growths are going to be asur. So I will say, what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa. If by take a quick look at the Ran, I will say, right, the Ran's on the left hand side. It's 3 lines in. L'Rab Yanai parach da amar le'el basal shel truma shirabu gidulav alikaro mutter da alma svirle de kulu gidulan afapi she'ini surna de karka malin es ha'ekar. So just to be clear, when Rabbi Avraham is asking a question, Rabbi Avraham is asking a question of Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Yanai said that Allah l'maisa, if you have an onion of truma, that then you went ahead and replanted, and now the additional growth surpasses the original growth. The additional growth is mevatel, the original growth, and this is no longer considered to be an onion of truma. Rather, again, it's an onion of heter. So I will say, here's the kasha. What's the kasha over here? I will say, you see that halacha l'maisa in this case, if you have something she'in zarokala, if you have a growth where the original bulb, the original item does not decompose, if you were to replant it, anything that grows from that will be asr. And I was saying, now I want to be clear. This is talking about a case of neder. So let me just frame this case. Let's just use an onion, right? Because onion seems to be the paradigmatic example of this. I take an onion and I say konam batzal zu alai, or let's say konam batzal zu alai. This batzal, this onion is konam to me. So I'll say, so now what's the halacha? If I go ahead and I exchange that onion for something else, what's the halacha? What's the status of the exchanged item? Asr. What happens if I take that onion and I replant it, right? And now I will say again, the onion expands to 100 times, Kanai right? Milk or grow onion, right? The onion expands to 100 times its original size. What's the halacha? Asr. That's called giduleim. Now that's what I will say. Even if now I have that 100 times larger onion, zaftig onion, I uproot it. I replant it. So now this is gidulin of gidulin. What's the halacha? That's asr. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, if you take an item that's asr, and you go ahead and you replant it, no matter how much more new growth you have, New growth is not mevatel old growth. Shabbos said it seems to contradict what we said before. So we'll say new growth is not mevatel old growth. So no. Rabbi Avraham says no. Shiny konamos. No. You're bringing in a different case here. We'll say, remember again, I want to point out something very interesting. Up until now, we've been speaking about things like truma, kilaya, kerem, shmita. Now you're bringing in konamos, nedarim, konamos. So the konamos. So konamos are different. Why? So Ross is incredible. Amar about shiny konamos hoil the by mishal alayhu haviluhu kidavar sheish lamatirin ve'im batal borov. Wow. Well, so remember again. So remember in yesterday's daf we spoke about the concept that a davar sheish lamatirin, an item ultimately again that becomes permitted on its own, is never batal. So what's the paradigmatic example of that? Remember again from yesterday's daf? Right, the base of shnol to be yomtiv, right? So when the chicken lays an egg on yomtiv, the egg is going to be muktzah. And even if that egg gets mixed in with 1,000 other eggs, it's not going to be batal. Why? Because l'maisa, the Isser goes away when? That night. Right, that night. The next day. So therefore, again, in the davar sheyesh l'matirin, we don't employ the concept of bittul. So I'll say, this is incredible. The Gemara says, do you want to know why when you make a neder not to eat this particular onion, even if you replant it 1,000,000 times over, and it grows 1,000 times larger, the new growths will not be mevatel the old growths. Do you know why? Because an item that is asra al konamos is considered to be a davar sheish l'matirin. They will say, why is it a davar sheish l'matirin? Why does it have the ability to become permitted? Because you could always have your neder annulled or revoked. So because it is a davar sheish l'matirin, that's why it's not batal. So fascinating. Therefore, again, it's not bittul borov. First thing, 1 second. Very truma. This is actually so fascinating. Very truma. Di by mishal alei ubat libarov. Here I will say truma is an example of something that you could also go ahead and have annulled. So I'll say this is actually quite fascinating. You would not have known this without Maseches Nedarim Daf Nun Tes. If you go ahead and you designate something as truma, technically speaking, the Gemara is suggesting that has the status of like a neder-like declaration. So if you want to have that declaration annulled, this is before it gets to the hands of the Kohen, if you want to have that declaration annulled, you have the ability to do so. Isn't that fascinating? Take a quick look at the Ran, cross to the left. The Ran says, very truma di by mishal alei. The Ran says, ayidei pesach ocharata kishar nedarim. So I said, this is fascinating. You could have a truma designation annulled, just like you could have any other neder annulled. How do you have a neder on the roll? Say, it's going back to the beginning of the Masechta. Pesach. Pesach means what? We find an opening. Some information that you were not cognizant of at the time you made the neder. That had you known this at the time of the neder, you would not have made the neder. Or charata. What's charata? Remorse, right? So what's this fascinating? So imagine, I go and I designate some produce as truma. I say, you know what? I didn't mean, I'm so upset that I designated that. I meant to designate. Okay, no problem. You can reverse the designation. In that respect, truma is a davar sheish l'matirin. So if truma is a davar sheish l'matirin, and yet again, truma is batal. Truma is batal. I was saying, according to what you just said, anything for which you could have revoked or annulled, ultimately, again, it's davar sheish l'matirin. If it's davar sheish l'matirin, it shouldn't be batal. So after all, look at truma. The Gemara says, "Disnan sa truma t'mei shenafel lepachos v'mei chulin." So let's listen to this case. If you have a sa'ah of truma t'mei, that fell into less than 100 sa'ah of chulin, what's the halacha? Tirkav. You have to let the mixture rot. Because you don't have the proper ratio. Remember again, the ratio for bittul for truma is 100 to 1. So if you don't have 100 to 1 heter, then the mice say again, it's not bought. You have to let it rot. Halamea tala. So but yet if the truma tmeya fell into a ratio of 100 to 1 of chulin, it would work. In other words, it would be batal. So the Good Gemara says, no. Amri b'truma biyad koin askinan. Delo masi mishalale. That case, what I would say is, we're talking, when is truma not batal? When it's already in the hands of the Kohen, which we'll say makes sense. In other words, if I'm a Yisrael, and I went ahead and I designated Truma and gave it to the Kohen, I can't now decide to revoke that designation, right? When the Truma is in my hands before I deliver it to the Kohen, then again, it almost has like the status of a neder. I could go ahead and choose to revoke it. I understand. I can go through the process of revocation or annulment. Once it gets to the hands of the Kohen, that's it. Right? I no longer have any power of it. That's what at that point is considered to be a davar she'ein lo matirin. And what's the halacha with a davar she'ein lo matirin? It's batal. It's batal. That's why, again, if truma tameya falls into a ratio of 100 to 1, 100 parts chulin to 1 part truma tameya, ultimately, again, it will be batal. To which the Gemara says, "Lo matzi mishale." If that's the case, im hasefa. Look at the end case. Im ha'isat tahora timacher lekoin. So also yet again, look at the end case. The end case is that if it was a sa'ah of truma that fell into truma tahora that fell into a ratio of less than 100 parts tchulin, you should sell the mixture to a kohen. But one second. If we're talking about a case where it's already in the hands of the Kohen, then why does the Mishnah say to sell it to a Kohen? To which the Gemara is very interesting. It will say, Ella, b'yisol shenafulo mebeis avi imo Kohen askinan. So what's the case? What's the case? This is fascinating. We'll say this is about a case where the truma was inherited by the grandson of a Kohen. So we'll say you can have the following situation. Let's say you have Aharon, right? Aharon is a Kohen, right? Aharon has a daughter, Rachel. Rachel marries the Yisrael. That happens, right? She marries the Yisrael Ruvain, right? So together they have a son, Shimon, right? So now what happens? Aaron dies. Rachel is the only child. Rachel inherits her father. Part of the estate that Rachel inherits from Aaron, her father, is what? Truma. Rachel dies. Rachel only has one son, Shimon. Right, let's say Reuven predeceased her. So Reuven, the husband, predeceased Rachel. Rachel dies. She has one surviving son, Shimon. Shimon inherits his mother. Included in the inheritance of his mother is Truma from his Zayda Aaron. So you have a case of a Yisrael who owns Truma, but what? Can't eat it. So what does he do in that case? So what does he do in that case? Again, that's the case the Gemara, the Mishnah says he sells it to a Kohen. So we'll say that would be the case where if Truma got mixed in with less than 100 parts chulin, a Yisrael can't eat that mixture. He has no choice but to sell it to a Kohen. To which the Gemara says, Ela Ema, I'm sorry, Shalom Beisavi Imo, Askina, Vaha Katani Seifa, Timacher Kohen Chutz mi Dme Oso Sa. I will say, but the Seifa says you should sell to the Kohen, but Chutz mi Dme, with the exception of the value of that Sa. But if that's the case, I will say then Al-Ochal should be able to include the value of that Sa as well. Ela Ema, the Gemara says like this. You have to say as follows. Bishlama Konamos, so I will say, remember again, we're trying to figure out why in the case of where I said this onion, Shrei Konam Batzel Zu Alai. This onion should be Konam to me. So we'll say, what did we say? If you take that onion and you replant it now, and now let's say, we'll say it expands 100-fold. What's the status of the onion? What's the status? Aser. Aser. Gidulehen are Aser. Why? So the Gemara wanted to suggest it's a davar sheish lo matirin. Here's the problem with that. Truma is also a davar sheish lo matirin, right? And at the end of the day, truma could be batal. So why can't konamos be batal? Here we go. It's fascinating. Here's the distinction. Bishlam konamos mitzvah leitshule alehen. Bishun Rabbi Nassan. He will say, here's the difference. Not only are konamos possible to annul and revoke. Not only is it possible, but what Rabbi will say, it's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to go ahead and annul and revoke. Da'am Rabbi Nassan said, Kalano der ki'ilu bana bama. Right? Whoever makes a neder, ultimately, again, it's as if he has built a bama. Plus, we had this Gemara before. Making a neder itself is an illegal process, right? Making a neder itself is as if you went ahead and you built a bama. And if you fulfill the neder, it's as if you've offered up on the bama. So we'll say, remember, we actually explained this before, that the idea when a person makes a neder, he's creating additional levels of Isser. Kadosh Baruch Hu already created enough Isurim for us. We do not need to make more. So the act of building a bama is like building an alternative religion. So why are you answering additional things upon yourself if you don't need to? It's as if you're building a bama. Okay, that's bad enough. But then if you decide to go ahead and go through with the neder, as opposed to having it annulled and revoked, that's like actually offering up a carbon on top of the mizbeach itself, on top of the bama. So we'll say, so when it comes to konamos, not only can you revoke them, but what? There's a mitzvah to do that. Therefore, again, I will say, they're really, a konam really is a davar sheish lamatirin. So because it's a davar sheish lamatirin, therefore what? Halach, and there's a mitzvah to revoke it, therefore it's not batal. To which the Gemara says, as follows, good, Truma, my mitzvah, Truma, there's no mitzvah to revoke the designation. So I will say, by Truma, can you revoke the designation? Can you do it? Yes. Should you do it? No. There's no particular mitzvah to go and revoke it. Therefore, I will say that's the fundamental distinction. So what the Gemara is suggesting is, that's why by konamos, gidulehen are going to remain aser, because since there is a mitzvah to revoke or to annul your neder, it's really like a davar sheish lo matirin, and therefore again it's not going to be batal. Therefore, no matter how much new growth you have on that onion, the onion of the konam will still remain aser. Incredible. Says the Margufa, Rabbi Yochanan, litra b'tzalm shetikna v'zarim v'sher sefikula. What's another interesting case? Rabbi Yochanan says, we've learned this before. If you have a litra, right, litra is an amount, litra of onions, shetikna. So we'll say, what did you do? You tithe them. And then what happens? You went ahead and you replanted them. What's talacha? Misaseres lefi kula. You have to retithe the entire amount. That will say, now what does that show you? That new growth is mevatel old growth. Because remember again, the old growth was tithed. The new growth is not. Now you're saying you have to tithe the entire growth because the new growth surpassed the old growth, and therefore the new growth is mevatel the old growth. So Yosef Rabba v'kamar l'hashmaita, Rabba was sitting and saying over this teaching, Amar Rav Chisda, man so'is lecha, Rabbi Yochanan Rabcha, who taught this to you? And to Rabbi Yochanan your Rabbi. After all, heter shebahen lehechan halach. How can you say that the entire growth of the onions now has to be tithed? What happened to the heter? In other words, I will say, let's say for argument's sake, right? Not for argument's sake, as the case was, I had a litra of onion. Well, let's call it 1 litra of onion. So I'll say, what happened? I tithed it. Now I replanted it. So now Baruch Hashem K'nai Nahara, it's 10 litra of onion, right? 100 litra of onion. So now both say, so now what do we say? So we'll say, let's call it 10. Let's call it 1 original and now 10 more growth. So now we'll say I have 11 litra of onion. So we'll say, so now what's the halach? What did the Gemara say? You have to tithe the entire amount. So the Gemara says now, so Rav Chisda said, one second, what happened to the original litra that was tithed? Why? I understand if you want to say you have to tithe the new growth, but why should you have to tithe the old growth? Where did it go? It was already tithed. To which the Gemara says, Amar Lei, he said back to him, Mi lo tran, did we not learn the kavasa? But Salim Shadolem Shamos is quoting the case from yesterday. We'll say, so again, he says back to Rav Chisda, Rabbi, okay, you can ask the same question over here. But Salim Shadolem Gishamim, if you have onions, and we'll say this was the case ultimately, if you remember again, 6th year onions. So Rashi says over here, B'Salim Shal Shishis, 6th year onions, and what happened, Rabbi say? Sheyard Alem Gishamim, rain fell upon them, B'Simchu, and now Rabbi say, what happens? They sprouted leaves. Remember this case? Him hayu alin shalah and shchorin, if the leaves were dark, asurin. Ultimately, again, the onion becomes aser. Rabbi say, why does the onion become aser? Because the darkened leaves are considered to be significant shmita growth. Now they're shmita onions. So horiku, if the leaves are just pale or light colored, mutarin. Ultimately, again, it's mutar. Sa'ai says, shchorin, amai asurin. But one second, just because they're black, right? Just because the leaves are dark, why should the onion become aser? Leima heter shebahen lehechan halach. What happened to the whole part of the onion that was mutar? I was going to say, remember again, the whole part of this onion that was 6th year growth. So where did the heter go? Amar lei. So he said, you're right. Mi sabris al ikar katani. Do you think that when we said if the leaves are black, ultimately again it's aser? You think aser goes on the entire onion? No. Atosefes katani asuri. it means the additional growth is asur. Chisda said, but einachinami, the original onion remains mutter. Ihachi, if that's the case, my asur b'shem Gamliel Neymar. What is Reb Shimon Gamliel himself coming to teach us? What does Reb Shimon Gamliel say? The Sanya, Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer, Hagadol b'chiyuv chayiv, Hagadol b'pater, b'ptur pater. Right? Reb Shimon Gamliel said that which grows. Right? We'll say b'chiyuv in this case means in the time where there's a chiyuv of beer. Rashi says over here, b'shviyis chayiv b'beer. Anything that grows during the Shemitah year has an obligation of beer. What's remember going back to yesterday says, what's beer? Beer says that during the Shemitah year, are you allowed to pick produce and store it in your house? Yes, as long as that same produce is readily available in the field. The moment it's no longer readily available in the field, you can't store it. You can eat it, but you can't store it in your home. So Rosh Hashanah says, that which goes ahead and grows during the Shemitah year is ultimately going to be chayiv in beer. Ultimately, again, that which grows b'ptor is going to be butter. So the Gemara says, Tana kama nami haki kama haki Tana kama nami haki amar kula masis Shimon Gamliel katanila. So Tana Kama will say that the entire Mishnah reflects the view of Shimon Gamliel. Va'ad kan lo shama sevos. Listen to this. And up until this point in time, when did Rabbi Shimon Gamliel hold this position? Ad kan lo shama say Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Shabbos say, when did Shimon Gamliel say? Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's position is that ultimately Hosafa is not mevatel ikar. Additional growth is not mevatel supplemental growth. When does Rabbi Shimon Gamliel say that? The lo TORAH. This is actually fascinating. When does Rabbi Shimon Gamliel say that additional growth is not mevatel new growth? That's when you did not put in any effort. Aval heichad de TORAH. Rabbi say ultimately again, when a person inserted human effort, for example, when you replanted something, batal baruba, then the new growth ultimately again surpasses old growth. So we'll say this is actually a fascinating distinction. We'll say listen to the distinction the Gemara is making over here. So the Gemara, we'll remember again, this whole time we're just trying to figure out, does the identity of new growth, if new growth surpasses old growth, is the new identity able to be mevatel the original identity? So Shimon wants to make a fascinating distinction. It all depends on how the new growth occurred. If the new growth occurred because of human intervention, then new growth ultimately is able to be mevatel old growth. But if the new growth just happened by itself, then ultimately it cannot be mevatel old growth. That's the distinction. So the Gemara says, so we'll say, by the way, just to understand how profound that is, even on a hashkafic level, we'll say, when is new growth mevatel old growth? If you did the work to make it happen. If a person put in there, because remember again, what's the example of human intervention? The example of human intervention is you took something, you uprooted it from the ground, and then you replanted it. That's a case of human effort. That's the case now, we'll say you uprooted it, you replanted it. Now after replanting it, there's new growth. That new growth is mevatel the old growth. Why? Because there was human effort. We'll say, what a profound metaphor. We'll say, sometimes change happens, but it doesn't happen because of you. It just happens to you. Right? In other words, we'll say, you could let life live you, or you could live your life. So ultimately, change always occurs. The shaila just is, does change occur to you, or do you make change happen? So the Gemara says, change that occurs to you generally doesn't really change you all that much. It doesn't change your identity, because you're not the catalyst. You're not the agent of change. So we'll say that's one case. The item is in the ground. You didn't do anything. Something fundamentally changes. And we'll say, does that really affect change within the item? No, not really. So it's true in an onion, and it's true in a person. We'll say onions and people have a lot of things in common. Onions have many layers. People have many layers. Onions make you cry. People can make you cry. Onions, right? Go ahead and insert flavor into anything. People, through their meisim, have the ability to insert flavor into all areas of life. A lot of similarities. So too again, if halacha l'maisa, you write the onion just changes by itself, that change is not really a sustainable change. But if someone uproots the onion, right, and then replants it, suddenly again, that change, the new growth, has the ability to go ahead and negate the old growth. I will say, so again, one more moment in the metaphor. In the metaphor, I will say, is if you affect change in your life by being the catalyst of change, actively uprooting something in your life and then replanting it in a different way, the new growth has the ability to be mevatel the old growth. Why? Because you were the catalyst of change. Because you lived your life, as opposed to just letting life live you. If growth occurs, but you didn't have anything to do with it, the new growth does not negate the old growth. Incredible. So is that really true? That anytime you went ahead and you did the tircha, it's batal barov, v'hari litra meiser tevel. I will say, what about the case of the litra meiser tevel? So I will say, so this ultimately again is the case where it was planted a second time. Dikat tarach, where again you put in the effort. Vikatani va'osa litra ma'asra l'mimakam achir. I will say, we learned, this is the case we had before. But yet halacha we learned that original litra, you have to go and you can't tithe it from the growth, you have to tithe it from somewhere else. Lefi cheshbon, shiny gabi meiser is different. Why? Da'amar kra aser to aser. I will say there's a concept, there's almost like a built-in understanding, sometimes by meiser, that something could be subject to meiser multiple times. The Gemara says that Teira Zari Inish, Isura Lo Zari Inish. People go ahead and replant Heter, they don't replant Isser. Says the Gemara, Gufa, Amr Rabbi Chanina, I just want to get to that, we want to make sure we get to that halacha Maisa. Amr Rabbi Chanina, Tirsa, Amr Rabbi Yanai, Basal Shal Truma. So we still haven't resolved this. Basal Shal Truma. You have an onion of Truma, Shenatu. You replanted it. So we'll say, so again, the case over here is I have an onion of Truma, it was Truma. I now replant the onion of Truma, V'rabu Gidul of Alikaro, and I will say, what happens? It experiences exponential growth. So now there's more new growth on the old growth. So we'll say, what's the halacha? So mutter, it becomes mutter. We'll say mutter means what? The onion is no longer Truma. Why? Because the new growth surpassed the old growth. Lememra, top of Samech, the Giduli Heter Malin Eser. So now you're telling me that new growth has the ability to move out the old growth. Vatnan. We learn about say same question we do. Vatnan. Gidule Truma. So I will say, but yet we learned that the growth of Truma is like Truma. So what are you talking about? The growth of Truma like Truma. Truma says you're right. Gidulan Kamrinon. We're talking about the growths of the growths. So I will say, which would mean you take if you take out an onion of Truma and what you replant it and now it grows. What's going to be the status of those growths? Truma Aser. But now if you uproot that onion and what? Replant it again, that's gidulin, that's going to be mutter. Really? So Hanami Tanina, gidulin chulin. The growths of growths are also chulin. So I'm sorry, Hanami Tanina, we already learned this, that the growths of growth are chulin. It will say it's coming to teach us so gidulin, the growths of growths are going to become chulin. What's the chiddush? The chiddush of that is even talking about something where the bulb, the original bulb, never decomposes. Incredible. I've Hatanan we learned hatevel gidulav mutarin. Yet say we learned that tevel. If you took untithed produce and you went ahead and replanted it, gidulav mutarin. Ultimately, again, the growth will be mutar, b'davar shezaro kala, assuming that the original growth decomposes. Aval davar she'in zaro kala, but if halacha l'maisa again to us something where the original bulb does not decompose, gidule asurit, even the growths of the growths will be aser. To which the Gemara says ribuya derabu gidulan alikaro. So the Gemara says ribuya derabu gidulan alikaro mutar kamashlan. So what's going to teach us that halacha l'maisa inachinami, if the additional growths surpass the old growth, ultimately, again, it's going to be mutter. So we'll say, how do we pass halacha l'maisa? So we'll say, so again, we're left with one core question. What's the one? It doesn't. It sounds like the Gemara resolved it that new growth can, if it surpasses old growth, can be mavatal. But I will say, what is the halacha? So what I want to point out is just something very interesting, which is that halacha l'maisa, there's not one halacha. Now the reason is, so we'll say, see, here's what's fascinating. The way the Gemara wanted to frame this question is kind of like an overarching question. You have an item that has a status. Now what happens? What do you do with the item? Let's go through it. What do you do with the item? You replant it. And now what occurs? New growth. The new growth surpasses the old growth. So now what's the shayla? What's the shayla? Is the new growth mavat of the old growth? So I will say, essentially what you're going to see in the halacha is, you can't frame the question that way. The reason you can't frame the question that way is because each case is going to be different. Shemitah is going to be different than Truma, because they're two different halachic operating systems. So that's what's fascinating over here. So we look at it as like one question. Could new growth, so I'll show you this, listen to this. So the Rambam, I'm just going to show you two examples. The Rambam, in Hilchos Shemitah and Yovel, Perek Dalet Alocha Chafav. So we'll say, so remember again, when Yishmael came along, this is what he came with, right? The original question was, Yishmael came along, we'll say, with a 7th year onion, and what did he do? He replanted it in year number 8, and now there's more year 8 growths than year 7 growths. That's how this whole thing started. The last 2 days was because of Yishmael from Kfar Yama, Paskin's Rambam, Hilchos Shemitah, Perek Dalet Alocha Chafav. Get ready. You feel the anticipation? You feel it? It's building, right? Good. So, Batzal Sha'akara B'Shvius, Unato B'Shminis. You uproot, right? You have a 7th year onion. You uprooted it in the Shemitah year, and you replanted it in year number 8. Here it is. The Rabu Gidula Valikaro, and I will say the year 8 growth surpasses year 7th. You want it? You want me to tell you what's next? Let's listen to this. Ha'elo Gidula Vasikaro V'hoterakol. Right? The new growth surpasses the old growth, and the onion is mutter. Why? So I'll say, this fine. But what's the kunz? Here it is. Hoil ushvius asura ayidei karka, kach nitilasa ayidei karka. It's not a dinim bittel. Well, it is somewhat a dinim bittel. But remember, this is the distinction being made in today's daf. Shemitah's different, because the same earth that transformed the produce into Isser. Rabbi say, remember again, comes the Shemitah year. What transforms produce into Isser Shvius? What transforms it? The land. They will say, what's the raya? If comes Shemitah, you have cucumber, right? You have wheat in your silo. What's the status of the wheat? It's mutter. So what do you see? It's not the calendar that transforms Shemitah produce into Isser. It's the land. So therefore, again, the same way in year number 7, the land transforms it into Isser. If the new growth in year number 8 surpasses the old growth, the land transforms it into Heter. Contrast that with Truma. Parak Yud Aleph, Hilchos Trumas, Halacha Chav. Here we go. Hazoreah as a Truma b'shogei gehapech b'mezi yikayi. Listen to this. No. Sorry. Gidulei Truma. So let's listen to this. You take Truma and you replant it. Harehin kechulin l'chol davar. So I'll say, interestingly enough, you take Truma, you replant it, and the new growth surpasses the old growth. What's the halacha? It's like chulin. So I'll say, that's where we paskin. That new growth has the ability to be mevatel old growth by Truma. Now there's a kunst in this as well, which is ella sha'asurim lezarim. So I will say, ultimately, again, however, Chazal said a non-Kohen shouldn't eat this. And the Rambam goes on to discuss a whole bunch of things that we're concerned about. But leaving aside that piece of that din d'Rabbanan, I will say, what do you see? Here's what's interesting. So by Shemitah, so in both cases, we will paskin that the new growth surpasses the old growth, the new growth ultimately is mevatel, the old growth. But again, for two different reasons. Right? In the Shemitah case, it's because the same earth that created Isser is the same earth that now could create Heter. By Truma, it's a dinim bittel. By Truma, it really is a dinim bittel. That ultimately, again, it's a davar she'im lo matirin. Therefore, it's batal barov. And as long as the new growth surpasses the old growth, ultimately, again, it's going to be mutter. So we'll say, so again, it turns out that we paskin that new growth, if new growth surpasses old growth, it has the ability to be mevatel, the old growth. But again, different cases will have different mechanics for why that works. So we'll say, Hadrun alach anodim in ayerek, shkoyach and mazel tov. All right, Chaver on Zoom. Oh my gosh, the whole Dovid, Moshe, Jerry, all in Eretz Yisrael, incredible, wow. Jerry, I see you. Are you in a t-shirt? Gosh, it's supposed to be 9 degrees here today. It's ridiculous. At least Moshe is wearing a jacket, something. Mamish. Okay. We're definitely in Gullus. Mr. Ringo also has summertime, but that's still also Gullus. That's South Africa. All right, Chavra, have a great day, everyone, and good Shabbos, Lichtige Chanukah.